Hello there, and welcome to Lore Dive, where we look into and analyze the stories behind all of our favorite video games. Today we are going into our final episode of Friday the 13th, and looking into all of our various versions of Jason within the game. All of the Jasons in this video, sans two exceptions, are based off of how Jason looked in one of his several outings murdering teenagers in the woods. This isn't just limited to the way each Jason looks, as their weapons and abilities are also somewhat tailored to what they had in their respective movie. So sit back and relax as we say goodbye to this legendary franchise that met an unfortunate end. As Jason, your goal is to kill every counselor in the game and prevent their escape. In order to do this, you're going to need to pay attention to the main objectives that the counselors will be trying to complete, as listed in the counselor video, and ensure that they aren't completed, or, if completed, that they are otherwise impeded. Jason has two main ways to attack. A basic strike that will cause Jason to hit anything in front of him with his weapon of choice. Using this will not kill a counselor immediately, but can damage them. After repeated strikes, they will start to limp, making them easier to be caught up to. When finally caught up to, they will be able to be finished off with another attack or by using Jason's grab. This basic attack can also be used to break windows and damage doors. Jason's second main form of attack is his grab. Grabbing a survivor will make them prone to instant death, using the animation of your choice from a list of equipable ones for your victims. These animations are split into weapon-specific deaths and general ones available across all versions of Jason. While it is fun to mix things up with different deaths, these are, in essence, largely cosmetic in nature, with some taking longer to do than others, which may influence which ones you will want to equip. Certain animations will also not be able to be played in certain areas depending on the terrain, so you'll have to be careful where you grab people. You can also bring counselors to interactable objects in the environment, allowing you to perform an environmental kill instead. However, be careful, as if you take too long, or if the counselor has a pocket knife, they'll be able to escape your grasp, leaving you stunned for a moment. All Jasons have very similar abilities, but they do differ in some very significant ways. Jasons have 4 main abilities and 2 secondary abilities, that while the same across all versions of Jason, will alter strategies depending on which one you're playing as. The first main ability Jason has is his Morph. With Morph, you can move Jason's location anywhere on the playable map, which will show objectives and other points of interest. Any counselors nearby will see Jason appear out of nowhere, but will be given a VHS-like effect on their screen, showing that Jason has used his ability. The morph isn't exact, so if you morph to a location that is impossible to move to, the game will try to move you to the nearest possible location. Since Jason always starts in his shack at the beginning of the match, Morph is a good way to quickly get to an objective and start hunting. Jason's second ability is Sense, and is one of his most important, as it will help him in finding and hunting down counselors. When used, Sense will cause everything to be tinted gray, except for any counselors who are nearby, who instead will be illuminated in red. If a counselor is in a building, the entire building will be illuminated instead. If a survivor has reached maximum fear, this will greatly increase how far away Jason can see them. Jason's third ability is Shift. Shift is Jason's second teleportation ability, and is quite effective in hunting down counselors. When in use, Jason's perspective changes to the first person, and he starts to move at hyper-fast speeds. Any nearby survivors will receive the VHS screen effect as a warning that he is teleporting. While shifting, Jason is not affected by bear traps and cannot be stunned until the shift ends. Jason's final ability is Stalk. With Stalk, Jason can turn off the normal musical cue that warns survivors of his approach. This allows Jason to sneak up on players in a way that he wouldn't be able to do normally. Granted, the moment that the counselor is in line of sight of Jason, the music will immediately turn back on for them, allowing for some fun, shocking encounters. These basic abilities aren't the only thing that Jason has in his arsenal. After a period of time, Jason will enter a Rage mode. When in Rage mode, Jason can still be stunned by normal, but can no longer be knocked to the ground. He also no longer has to break down doors normally and can instead walk straight through them. Along with this, Jason starts the match with throwing knives and bear traps at his disposal. Throwing knives will allow Jason to use a ranged attack, damaging survivors from afar. He is limited to a certain amount of throwing knives at the beginning of the match, but can find replacement ones in various locations. He also has a set of traps that he can lay down, and it is most common to set these down where counselors are going to have to do objectives, since if they go off, he will receive a notification. With all of this in mind, each Jason has various differences when it comes to how powerful their abilities are, so we'll have to go through each of them one by one to know which Jason you would prefer. Part 2, or Sackhead Jason, is Jason's first ever on-screen debut, not including his brief appearance as a hallucination in Part 1. As such, he is far from his recognizable hockey mask, which he had yet to obtain, and instead wears this lovely potato sack. Underneath that potato sack is honestly my favorite version of human Jason, as he actually looks like a man who's been roughing it in the woods. This Jason's default weapon is a pickaxe, which I found a bit odd since I don't recall him ever actually using it in the movie. And in Friday Part 2, Jason doesn't really have a standard weapon that he uses, so I guess it's fair to give him the random one. This Jason's special strengths are his ability to run, the fact that he has more traps than other versions of Jason, and his morph ability has a fast cooldown. His weaknesses include the fact that his shift takes longer to charge up, and can only move at slower speeds. Jason's defense for this version is also pretty low, allowing him to get unmasked easier, and he has a low chance of blocking attacks. The last of his weaknesses is that he is not the greatest swimmer in this form, moving slower than other Jasons. Part 3. This is probably one of the most memorable versions of Jason due to it being the first appearance of his iconic hockey mask. This Jason is also one of the few to have an alternate costume in the form of Retro Jason, which is a recolor based off of the release of the Friday the 13th game on the original Nintendo and Famicom. Other than the color change and the unique song that plays when he is nearby, this Jason's strengths and weaknesses are the same as his normal form. Part 3's weapon is a basic axe, which may be in reference to how he's defeated at the end of the movie. This Jason's special strengths are his ability to run, his weapon doing more damage than normal, and his ability to destroy doors quickly. And his grip strength will make it very difficult for counselors to escape if they're grabbed. His weaknesses include the fact that he can be stunned fairly easily, and that both his sense and stock cooldowns are fairly long. Where Part 4 is very similar to Part 3 in terms of looks, there are some very clear differences. One thing you'll notice is that the mask in particular isn't the same mask that he's actually wearing in Part 3. This is because that the mask that they had to use in the movie is in fact a different mask, even though Part 4 is supposed to take place the day after Part 3, hence the axe slit that they added at the top of the mask. This Jason's weapon of choice is called the Pig Splitter, which almost looks like a gigantic cleaver of sorts. This version of Jason's special strengths are his ability to run, his increased weapon strength, and his ability to take down doors quickly. On the opposite end, though, his weaknesses include his slow water speed, the long cooldown on his shift ability, and his lack of traps. So anyone who knows anything about Friday the 13th Part 5 knows that this is not actually Jason Voorhees, but is in fact a man named Roy Burns. Despite that, he has just about every single ability that normal Jason does, which means that maybe Roy is actually more powerful than people give him credit for. Roy's special strengths are his ability to run, and I hope you're not going to miss Jason running because from here on out, no other Jason could run. Roy also has more traps than most versions of Jason, possibly due to the fact that he's not supposed to be spiritually inclined. Might mean that he's athletic and can get to places quickly? Hey, not all of these strengths and weaknesses make a whole lot of sense. His weaknesses are that his shift is longer and can only move at slower speeds. Roy is also not as sturdy as Jason, so his defense for this version is also pretty low, allowing him to get unmasked easier and to be knocked to the ground fairly quickly. He also has a lower chance of blocking attacks, and in general is not the greatest of swimmers. Part 6 is our first undead Jason, and he plays the part admirably. His skin has taken on an almost blackish tar-like consistency, and his weapon of choice is the metal fence post used to electrocute him in the movie. This version of Jason's strengths are that he starts out with more throwing knives than normal, and that his shift and sense have shorter cooldowns. His weaknesses are that he has fairly low defense and has a prolonged cooldown on his morph ability. He also can't run, which is something that he's going to share with every single Jason going forward. Part 7 is one of my favorite Jasons when it comes to looks, as he just looks incredibly cool with his exposed spinal column. He also gets to keep his chains around his neck, something that he gained due to his unfortunate end at the end of Part 6. Along with this is the Jason that gets to wield his trademark machete. Part 7's best strengths are that he has a short cooldown on his sense ability, moves fast in water, and can do some pretty hefty damage with that machete of his. Along with his inability to run, his weaknesses are that he is stunned relatively easily, and has very few traps compared to most other versions of himself. Part 8 is interesting, and is essentially the one that inspired Jason's ability to warp from place to place. This Jason wields a fire axe, and despite him basically sharing a weapon with other versions of Jason, he does have his own unique kills for it. This Jason seems to love water, as he has some of the fastest water speeds compared to other characters. That fire axe can also do some hefty damage to doors, allowing him to break through them with ease. His stalk ability is also up fairly often, so you could say he's one of the stealthier Jasons out there. On the flip side, he has a prolonged cooldown on his sense, meaning that it's going to take him a bit longer to find people. He also has virtually no grip strength, so he's going to want to kill very quickly if he has someone in his grasp. And of course, with all undead versions of Jason, he cannot run. The final movie version of Jason is the one where he starts to look like a giant cancerous growth rather than an actual human being, which kind of makes sense after everything he's been through. Part 9's default weapon is a double-bit axe, one of the largest that Jason can hold. His strengths include an increased cooldown on his shift and stalk abilities, and this Jason is pretty sturdy with an increased stun resistance. With that being said, though he is difficult to stun, he can be knocked down relatively easily early in the game, since he has fewer hit points than most. He also lacks very many traps, so he's not geared towards protecting multiple objectives at once. The final, and my personal favorite Jason, is Savini Jason. Created specifically for the game from the legend Tom Savini himself, the inspiration for this Jason is what he would look like if he managed to escape from hell. This Jason's unique weapon is called the Devil's Pitchfork, and honestly, just looks fantastic. He's also the only one who can wield this weapon. This Jason's strengths are his shift ability, allowing him to shift towards survivors more quickly. And that pitchfork isn't just for show, allowing him to heavily damage any survivor or doors that get in his way. His weaknesses, though, are his water speed, which makes sense as he's basically a Hellfire spawn in this form, the fact that he can't run, and that he has a weaker than average grip strength. So, make sure you struggle if he catches you. Before we end talking about all of the different versions of Jason, there are 2 additional characters who sadly didn't make it into the game due to the lawsuit that prevented the game from being worked on any further. The first, of course, which is Jason X, which was being worked on before the lawsuit put a stop to everything. And then the second character that was being worked on was Pamela Voorhees. It's unknown what Jason X was actually supposed to fight like, since the only way that people were ever able to actually see him was to essentially use his model over another version of Jason. And since we have virtually no information on Pamela, it's difficult to say if she's going to play exactly the same as her son and Roy Burns, or if she's going to have a completely new type of gameplay. It is sad that we were never able to actually play as these icons, with the game being all but abandoned at this point. But maybe, someday, these 2 will get their time to shine in a different game. And that's it for this final episode of the Friday the 13th Lore Dive. It's somewhat sad to say goodbye to it, but I get the feeling that I'll be working on something related to Jason fairly soon. If you liked the video, please do the YouTube roundup and, like, subscribe, all that fun stuff that you've heard a million times before. If you would also like to help with the creation of these videos, I do have a Patreon link down below, where you can get a few unique goodies, including seeing certain videos early. Right next to that Patreon link is my Twitch link, in case you would ever like to come by, and I normally play Dead by Daylight, but I am currently going through The Walking Dead right now, and that's been a bit of fun. I wish everybody a happy Friday the 13th, And as always, I thank you all for watching, and I'll see you next time.